Okay, good morning. We're at the very top of 8A. And we're continuing to discuss the brisa we had yesterday, in which we had a disagreement between Rebbe and Chachamim about, so we know that everyone agrees that generally when you bring one of these communal offerings, you have to have an error in hara and psak, and followed by doing the action, all b'shogeg, all in unintentionally. Um, but when it comes to an avodah zarah offense, so Rebbe says it's enough to just do the thing, and the Chachamim say no, it's like every other offense. You have to have both the halam davar, the incorrect ruling, and the action. And the Brisa continues to shavin, but Rebbe and the Rabbah and Chachamim agree. Shein mevi asham tali, that there's no asham tali. And asham tali is when it's unclear if you actually violated a prohibition or not. So in general, there's a asham tali. There's a kind of conditional, like if I did the offense, then this is my carbon, and if not, then then it's not. Um, the case of these communal offerings, ain't maybe Asham Tali. There's no Asham Tali. One. How do you get that? To see v'chiper alav hakohen al shigaso asher shagag. About an Asham Tali, it says the Kohen atones for him for his error that he committed. So since it's called a shogeg, it implies that just the shogeg action is enough um, to one second. Since the Torah says it's only done as a shogeg, it implies that the asham tali is for someone who would otherwise, like if it were not unclear, then he would have to bring a chatas. Um, so. So Rabbi Savar Misha Kol Chato B'Shagaga Yasazeh She'ein Kol Chato B'Shgaga. So Rabbi understands this to mean that everything has to be b'shogeg in order to require an asham talui, but the Par Kohen Mashiach. She'ein kol chato b'shgaga. Not every not every sin requires a chatas. Ella behelim davar. It's only when there is a helim davar, that's the when he's required to bring a chatas. So that's when he's required to bring an asham taloi. So without the helim davar, without the incorrect ruling, um, even Rabbi would say there's no asham taloi. So midei kol ksiv, but it doesn't say every sin he does that requires a chatas is b'shogeg. Yes, it says it's kind of implied. The imkain, if it didn't mean every sin, nichtav al shigigoso lamali asher shagag. There's extra words here. The inadvertent act that he did inadvertently. It's like an extra word. Why do you need an extra word? Hakamash malon ad ika kol cheto b'shgaga, until um, uh, that you don't bring a lashon tali unless there is unless it fulfills this requirement that uh, every sin that would bring about a chatos comes through a shogeg. So the Kohen Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol, is excluded because not everything that he has to bring a chatos for is just through the shogeg. There is a case, there is the case of Avodah Zarah where there's a chatos for shogeg alone, but in the case of other mitzvos, there's no chatos unless there's a both halam davar and the actual act. So Rabbanan, and how the rabbis understand this, Misha Chato Bishgaga, The Asham Tali is brought by somebody who sins b'shogeg. Yas Mashiach she'en chato b'shgaga. So the Kohen Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol, is excluded because his chait is not ever done only through the act b'shogeg. There's always a requirement. Lo b'avodas kochavim v'lo b'shar mitzvos. Whether the Chachamim hold whether it's avodas kochavim or other mitzvos, you still need both helam davar and the act b'shogeg. Ela b'helam davar im shigas matzah has to have both. Okay, that was a little tortured, but we'll continue with the next Mishnah, in which we continue to examine the details of these communal offerings and in what ways they're the same, what ways they're different, how if there's a avodah zarah involved, what is the commonalities and the differences. Ein bezin chayavim el ad sheyoru b'davar shezdon lakaris v'shigasa chatos. So this we know already, but the Mishnah is stating it for the first time, I guess, that the par helim davar shel sibur, the when does the Sanhedrin have to bring this communal offering? When there's it's not for any mitzvah. It's something that is a prohibition that requires kares as a punishment if it's done intentionally, and chatos if it's done unintentionally. As we've noted many times already. V'chein hamashiach, same applies to the Kohen Gadol. V'lo b'avodas kochavim. And when it comes to the court, if there's something they rule about avodas kochavim, ad sheyoru al davar shezdon lakaris v'shigasa chatos. Same rule. So there's no difference according to the Mishnah between avodah zarah and other mitzvos. If there's an improper ruling and an action taken inadvertently, whether it's avodah zarah or chatos, those are the two requirements for this communal offering. The Gemara says, "Minon, where do you get that from?" The Tanya, Rabbi Omer never kan alev and never lahalan alel. We have the word aleha appearing about the parhalam davar shel tzibur, and another case where talking about incest, or not incest, but marrying one's wife or sleeping with one's sister-in-law. So ma'alahala and davar shezdon lakaris v'shigasa chatos. So that's sleeping with your sister-in-law is something that you get kares for if you do it on purpose, and chatos if you do it unintentionally. Avkan, so we're going to apply that also to the requirements for par helam davar shel tzibur. Davar shel lakaris v'shigasa chatos. So ashkechan tzibur. Okay, fine. So you've proven to me about the par helam davar shel tzibur that it only applies to those type of prohibitions. Mashiach minal. How do you know the same rule applies to the par Parkoin Mashiach? Lash Masam, because we've seen this before also. If he sins, and it's the kind of guilt of the people. So what do the people have to do with it? Hare Mashiach Tzibur is linking it to the Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibur, just as the Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibur requires is only for a prohibition that's kares or chatas. So too it applies to the Kohen Gadol. And nasi, what about the third type, the nasi? Yalef mitzvos. So again, we have Gzera Shavak, Ksif Gabe Nasi V'Yasa Chas Mikol Mitzvos Hashem. When it says about bringing the carbon of the nasi who errs, it says any one of he goes against one of God's mitzvos. So Ksif B'Tzibur V'Yasa Chas Mikol Mitzvos. The same word mitzvos is used about the Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibur, establishing a connection. Mat Tzibur Davar Shel Davar Karetz Shigo Chatos Saf Nasi Davar Shel Davar Karetz Shigo Chatos. So we're going to apply that comparison to the type of prohibition that is covered by both the Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibur and the carbon of the chatos of the nasi. Yachid. How do you know that in the first place that the Torah says that all these things are covered by kares? If you do them, you get kares. How do you know that in general that if you do them accidentally, you bring a chatos? Where does that come from? Our Torah says v'im nefesh. V'im nefesh achas yachtav v'shgaga. If a nefesh, a soul, a person does an inadvertent sin, v'yilma tachton me'elyon. so the earlier passage teaches us about the later passage. Just as the Nasi has a chatos for doing he brings his nasi chatas for something that is zedona kares v'shigdaso chatos. The same applies to a regular person. That's how we know that he brings a chatos in the first place, because Torah tells us that the nasi brings a chatos. So a regular person also brings a chatos. It's just a different category, different kind of. It's just a regular person's rather than a communal one. Okay, Velovo is Kochavim Ad Sheyaru, and the Mishnah said the same applies to a sin involving Avodah Zarah, that there has to be a incorrect ruling followed by an incorrect action. But what is Kochavim Mino, and how do you know? The Torah Rabbanan. Lefishiyas Avos Kochavim Ladun B'Yatzma. Since the Torah takes the Avodah Zarah out of the category, right? We have a separate prohibition in the Torah that tells you that that avodah zarah is covered by that there's a prohibition of avodah zarah that's punishable by kares. So it is kind of dealt with in a separate chapter. So if it's dealt with separately,
Is that what Rashi mentions there? The achikativ v'chit tishgu v'lo tasu.
Yeah, which Rashi?
Rashi lefi yatsu avodat kochavim.
Right. So in that chapter, in that passage, we don't have anything about kares. Okay. So the Torah is dealing with it. The point is the Torah deals with avodah zarah separately from other sins. So maybe the rules are separate, right? Maybe for avodah zarah, it's even if it's a thing of avodah zarah that's not punishable by kares. Not all avodah zarah is punishable by kares. Sometimes there's a death sentence, right? So maybe avodah zarah is different than other sins. So namar me'ene v'nerahol me'ene. We have another common word that we're going to make gzera shavah. V'nela me'ene hakal. Right? It's like obscured from you, right? So. Mal lahalan dorishes don akaris v'shigdas achatos. Afkan dorishes don akaris v'shigdas achatos. So we're going to say that even of avodah zarah, since we have the word me'ene appears both, that's intended to tell us that even of avodah zarah, you know what it applies to. The chatos applies to something that's zedon akaris. Ashkechan tzibur. Okay, so fine. So that gzera shava has to do with the Parham Rishil Tzibur, Yachid Nasi Mashiach Minal. And what about all the other categories? Amakra V'im Nefesh Achas. When the Torah says if one soul commits something, it's an unusual phrase, right? If one soul commits something, so what does it mean by one soul, one person? Echad Yachid, Echad Nasi, Echad Mashiach. In other words, anyone, it's saying as anyone or any category does this, then it's the same rule. All of these are included by the term one person. And so again, we apply one to the other.
So we're saying that the punishment for avodah zarah is karet. Are we saying that? I mean,
No,
we're learning one from the other.
Any violation of avodah zarah that that kares applies to is in this category of of bringing a chatos for an individual or these communal chatos for the people we've been discussing, right? The Nasi, the Kohen Gadol, and the Sanhedrin.
So they're all they're all linked. They're linked together in the case that if karet would apply. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, right.
And we have to know when it would apply.
So the Torah tells us that generally. It says it's always saying that such a person will be cut off, right?
Karet to karet or something.
Yeah, right.
Mikola Amr, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so this is all based on the Gzera Shava of Aleha, right? Since it says Aleha in one case and Aleha in the other case, we're going to apply that to everything. Fine. That's if you use if you have the word Aleha that's free for Gzera Shava. But the rabbis have a difference. They use that Aleha to link it to something else, right? So um the aleha is has to do with yibum, right? So they're taking the word aleha. You can't marry your sister-in-law, but you can't sleep with your sister-in-law. But because it says aleha and it also says the word aleha in the chapter of yibum, it tells you about that once you do chalitza with one of the tsaros, with one of the wives, the others are all free as well. So it's a completely different use of the word aleha. So how do you, if you can't use the word aleha as a link, so how are you going to link the uh, so we have specifically about the Sanhedrin. We know the Torah tells us that that it's Zidono Kares Vishigas Ochatos. How do you apply that to all these other cases? Nafkal Midamasni Le Rabbi Shua ben Levi Lebrei. This is what Rabbi Shua taught his son. Torah Achas Yelachem Laosa Bishkaga. The Torah sums up by saying about avodah zarah, there's one law for everybody who does things accidentally. So v'hanefesh asher tasa biyad rama, and then it goes on and says, and what if someone does it intentionally, right? So huksha kol Torah kula avodas kochavim. So by using the word Torah achas, like it's talking about, the context is clearly like there's one rule for everybody with regards to avodah zarah. But by saying Torah achas, it's implying that this applies to everything in the Torah, right? That ma'avodas kochavim shechayavim al zedon akaris shel shigos chatos. Just as avodah zara, we see here that it's you get for mezid you get kares, and for shogeg you bring a chatos. Afkan. So regarding all the other laws, shechayavim al zedon akaris shel shigos chatos. The chatos is generally brought when the punishment for a mezid is kares. Now, okay, so that applies to the individual, right? Because that's talking about anybody. Yeah, Ashkelon Yachid, Nasi Mashiach, Ben Belos Kachavim Ben B'Shar Mitzvah Sibur Minalan. What about yeah? So that's the Yachid, but what about? Oh, 1 second. Yachid Mashiach. Oh yeah, so all right, so fine. So that applies to the individual, the Nasi, and the Kohen Gadol, whether through Avodas Kochavim or other mitzvahs, right? But Tzibur Minal, and what about the Parhelim Davar Shel Tzibur? Because the you can't include the tzibur in the yachid category, in the nefesh achas. It's not a nefesh achas. It's a group, right? Yalif el yom mitachton. So you apply one to the other. Just as one, there's a kind of a commonality there that you can apply. So this is a little unclear. Like usually the Gemara would have some kind of specific word or hekesh or xereshava or something. Here, the Gemara is just kind of blanket saying that since it applies here, it applies there as well.
But we were using the term Torah achat, right? So couldn't we learn this limud from Torah achat? That if whatever applies, it's one, say the Torah, it's a shegeg.
Yes, but that is in.
Chat is chatat, whereas what do you call it? Mezid is koreit.
Yes, but that is specifically in a chapter which leaves off by saying im nefesh achas, if one person, right? So how do you apply that to a group of people like the Sanhedrin? And the Gemara answers because you do, right? Because you just let one instance teach you about the other. Rabbi, what about Rabbi?
But in so many places it says in other places in Torah, it says Torah achat yelechem, right? I mean, it's implying that
Yeah.
the rules for the Torah. Oh, and I think I'm just now. This is me, but I don't know. You can darshan from that whatever the Torah says regarding what should apply to a tzibur, because it's the same Torah. No, I mean,
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why are they doing that specifically here. Yeah. Um, Not clear. That's a good question. You're sharp this week, Ken.
sharp this week.
Yeah, as always.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Thank you. Thank you.
okay. Okay, for Rebbe. Now, what about Rebbe? So Rebbe, remember, says um, that use the Xereshava Aleha Had Rabbi Shubin Levi Me'avile. What does the Torah Achas teach you? Mapikle Lechidatanya. This is what he uses it for. The Bryce says as follows: The Fisha Matzinu Shechalak Chazuvim Rabbim Lechidim. Since the Torah makes a difference, a distinction between a group and individuals with Avodah Zarah, Rabbim B'Sayif Mumon and Avad. What is the difference that if you have a whole group of people like in your nidachas, then they get executed by Saif, by the sword, and also their property is confiscated, destroyed really. Yechidim b'skilo mamonon palat, and individuals, they are executed with stoning, and their property is not destroyed. So there's a distinction there. Yachol nachlok b'korban sand. Maybe they have a different carbon, right? Talmud Lomar Torah achas yelachem. That's what we learned from Torah achas. Okay. Maskil for Chilkia mehagronia. Talmud l'cholak hakasuv. So the Bryce is saying that there's no distinction. Why? Because the Torah didn't. It says Torah achas hacholak, but if it hadn't said that, havamina nachlok. But otherwise, I would have said that since they have different punishments, then maybe they do have different karbanos. Ma nice. So, like, what are you proposing? What other carbon could they bring? Nice par. If they bring a cow, a bull, tzibur shar mitzvos hudamaisu. No, you can't say that because it's a tzibur. Bring only a tzibur brings a par, right? Everybody else brings a seir. Nice par ola v'sar lachata. So, what are you going to say? Bring both. Bring a bull for an ola and a goat for a chatas. Tzibur babos chachavim hudamaisu. Um, that's also reserved just for the Parham Del Rishon Tzibur. Nicely, sir. So what are you going to say? Bring only a goat. Nasi b'shar mitzvah sudamaise. That's the Nasi's carbon. Nicely, seira. What about a female goat? Yachid nami hani carbano. That's the an individual who commits idolatry. That's his carbon. So you're going to say bring a different carbon. Different than what? We've covered all the possibilities already. It has to be the same as somebody. So Gemara says Yitzrich. Now you still would need to state this. I might have thought that Tzibur Maise Parliel of Sar Lechatos. The Parhalam Darshel Tzibur is both a bull and a goat. Hane Naise Ipcha. Oh, so you know what we could have this guy do? Do the opposite. Bring a par for a chatas and a seir for an ola, right? Par chatas seir ola. So I might have said that. So that's why that's why the Torah then tells us Torah achas. In other words, to preclude that possibility. Iname, or you could say sarich ve'en lo takana. That yes, the tzibur has to bring a special carbon, but there's no way to do it. There's no unique options left. So therefore, you still have to bring the same as somebody. Kamash Malan. So the Torah says Torah achas. Either way, the Torah still has to tell us Torah achas. It's like this is the ideal. That ideally there might have you might have wanted to say bring a unique carbon, but since the Torah tells you Torah achas, no, there's no uniqueness. You bring the same like everybody else.
So what is that is the korban what is the korban that they're bringing for this? What is this case here? What are the korban? What's the maskana here? The
The
Torah
masana is that I might why does the Torah say Torah achas to tell you that everybody brings the same carbon,
for
right?
what? For which instance?
Oh, all of these. The oh no, sorry. The Yachid brings the same carbon as what?
The part Elam Davar for the tzibur. No?
Um,
Or we're talking about the Nasi or
the same for Avodah Zarah. He brings the same carbon for Avodah Zarah as the tzibur. Yes, as the Parlam Dor Shel Tzibur.
and that okay, and what's the korban in that case? That's the par?
For the Helm Dor Shel Tzibur is a Parla Ola and Seir Lachatas.
Right, okay, and that's the same for the Yachid then.
Yeah. Okay. Now. The Choli Alma Mias. Now everybody agrees. Kiksive Hanekrai, the parsha of Avodah Zarah, Bavadas Kochavim Hudiksive. We're talking about Avodah Zarah. My mashma, like so. Let's go back. What is that in Bamidbar? Okay, if somebody does a shogeg, right, and we've applied that to Avodah Zarah, but what's the indication that that is really for Avodah Zarah? Where do you get that from? Amar Rava, v'yitem Rabbi Shua ben Levi, v'yamin la kedi. So somebody, one of these Rava or Rabbi Shua or Kedi could be a person's name or it could be like anonymous. Amar Kra v'chitishku v'lo tasu es kol mitzvah seila. What it says there is when you do one of any of these or all of these mitzvahs. So Ezehi mitzvah shishkula keneged b'chol mitzvah. So how can you do a sin that is all of the mitzvah against all of the mitzvahs? What kind of sin is considered, as weighty as all the other mitzvahs? Have you ever do avodas kochavim? That's avodah zarah. Today, Rabbi Tana Rabbi has a different answer. Amakra Asher Dibur Hashem El Moshe. You do one of the mitzvahs that God told Moshe, right? Uksiva Asher Tziva Hashem Elokechem Biad Moshe, and then it says again everything that God commanded Moshe. Ezo Hi Mitzvah Shehi B'Dibur Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu V'Tziva Al Yedei Moshe. So, what mitzvah is it that God spoke through Moshe, right? Or that God spoke directly and was given by Moshe. So if you think back to the revelation on Har Sinai, who God spoke the first of the commandments, Anochi Hashem Lo Yelecha Elohim Acherim, himself, and then Moshe transmitted it as well. So the Tanakh Rabbi Shmuel, Anochi V'Lo Yelecha V'Piach V'Rashman. This is the well-known view that God himself, that the people heard from God Himself, as it were, the first two of the commandments on Har Sinai. So that's how we know that since this parsha talks about things that were transmitted from Hashem and from Moshe, so that's what it's talking about. It's talking about that avodah zarah, that lo yelecha Elohim acherim al panai. Rabbi Shmuel has a third view. In that parsha, it talks about anything that God commanded you from the day of Har Sinai and through all time. What is what mitzvah did we start with, as it were, on Har Sinai that then continues? We're talking about the first commandment, as it were, or the first two commandments on Har Sinai, and that has to do with Avodah Zarah. Wait a minute, there were mitzvahs before Har Sinai. The Brisa says there were 10 mitzvahs given at Mara, at the place where they stopped for water before Har Sinai. The whole parsha there says if you listen to what God commanded you, but God hadn't commanded them anything yet on Har Sinai, so it tells us that they actually did get commandments before Har Sinai. Okay, so this last answer isn't a good answer. The first two answers were good answers.
Well, what's
And
the
that
difference between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yehuda? They're both saying that it's the
Yeah, they're both saying the
Avodah
same thing, but
Kochavim.
they're both using a little slightly different logic, right? Rabbi Shmuel is saying that what mitzvah is it talking about in that parsha? The first mitzvah. So we're saying no, but that wasn't the first mitzvah. There were mitzvahs before Har Sinai. So we'll go back to the other view, which is that what mitzvah are we talking about there? The mitzvah that is as weighty as any other mitzvah, right? Or the mitzvah that was given directly by God. Nobody's arguing with that. and that is avodah zarah.
But they're both saying that it's
They're both saying the same
avodah
thing.
zarah.
They just have different logic.
Right.
We're
Okay.
rejecting the last logic, but it's all this. It all comes out the same anyway because we have two other ways of figuring out that parsha is really talking about avodah zarah. Okay, next Mishnah. Ein chayavin ala sevi alot tasei mikdash. Errors of this kind, these communal offerings, do not apply to something done in the Beis Hamikdash, or not done in the Beis Hamikdash, but having to do with the Beis Hamikdash. Vein mivin asham taloi ala sevi alot tasei mikdash, and likewise, there's no asham taloi, a doubtful asham. For things that may have been done having to do with the mikdash. But they are, you do have to bring one of these communal offerings for aseh and lo taseh mitzvos having to do with a nida, with sleeping with a woman who's having her period. Umavim asham toli al aseh ve'al lo taseh shebenida, and also that applies to asham taloi. And so, like, why is it bringing this up? It's, I think, because one of the mikdash things we talked about having to do with tuman tara in the mikdash, right? And so we're kind of our attention is brought to the issue of becoming tameh with a nida. And Ezi mitzvah say shabanida. What mitzvah say is there regarding to Anita? Like it's a negative thing. It's like don't sleep with Anita. Prosh min Anita. It is to separate yourself from Nida. Umitzvah sota saying what's the negative? Al tavo Anita. Don't sleep with Nida. So there are things. I mean, and this statement could apply to any assay and lo tasay that apply to the same thing. Often the Gemara will say that why do you have this repeated? Because one is in the language of an assay and one is in the language of lo tasay, and you're liable for two violations rather than one if you violate. Okay, so minani where do you get this from? Tzibur lo mechayve carbon bialma, that a carbon tzibur v'yachid asham tali nami lo, and that this doesn't apply in the mikdash for either a communal or individual's asham tali. Where do you get that from? Amar Yisrael Baruch Nime. Nemar v'ashem b'chatos v'yasham tali. The word v'ashem and you're guilty appears for both chatos and asham tali. V'nemar v'ashemu b'sibur, and you have a similar word v'ashemu about a carbon sibur. Ma v'ashem b'yachid b'chatos kavua, af v'ashemu b'sibur b'chatos kavua. So there's a link established between those. Umat tzibur b'chatas kavua, and just as the tzibur, the communal offering, where it says v'yashemu is talking about a chet which is for which you're liable to a chatas. Afasham toli name ein ba ela safek chatas kavua. So Nashim toli is also in that category because of the word ashem. Amrei, so they said, Yahachi, if that's the case, carbon olav name. Okay, so there's a different kind of carbon called the carbon olav, which is an ola that a person brings depending on his financial status. If he's wealthy, he brings a mammal, a goat, or a bull. If he's not so wealthy, he brings a bird. If he's really poor, he brings a mincha, a flower offering. There's another conjugation of the word asham. If ki yasham, when that person is guilty of an offense, so why don't you include that also? And then you would say that somebody who does who possibly has done a violation of a asham taloi. Would have to bring an asham tali, like one who does this kind of sin. So danin asham min v'ashemu, vein danin asham min yasham. It's not similar enough. Which one are we going to compare it to? Ashem and ashemu is closer than asham and yasham. Okay, that's just a judgment call. My nafkamina. So Mar says, well, what's the difference? V'atani drei Rav Yishmael v'shava kohen u'ba kohen. Zohi shiva zohi bia. This is now talking about saras. When the Gemara does have a Gzera Shava between the words Vishav Uva, right? Completely different words, maybe the same meaning. In other words, that you're coming to a particular space. Um, but the Gemara does say that you can do Gzera Shava. So if you can do Gzera Shava between the words Vishav and Uva, which are totally different words, so you can certainly do Ashem and Yesham. So the answer is obvious, but wait a second. Viod and furthermore, Neilef min v'Hashem mitumas mikdash v'kadashah. You have another instance of the word Hashem, which is used also about making the mikdash tameh. Dichsiv v'hu tameh v'Hashem. So my answer is Amrav Papa Danim v'Hashem u'mitzvos Hashem. Amin v'Hashemu u'mitzvos Hashem. It's kind of a supported Xerashava or a double Xerashava. Since you have both, like you have all these words v'Hashem and v'Hashemu and v'Nasham, right? How do you know how to apply it? So we're going to take the one which also has the word mitzvah Hashem in common. That's where we're going to apply our v'Hashem Xerashava. Okay, so in other words, it's kind of the Venn diagram intersection, if you will, of these two phrases which appear in the two passages. Okay, you want to do it that way, so maybe don't use the term mitzvah Hashem. There's another common phrase, v'nasa avono. So take the two common places there where both Vashem and Vinasa Avono are found, and that's two different cases. There's a longer phrase which appears in both. You do one of the mitzvos of Hashem, which you shouldn't do. So you find the place where you have this long passage. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 5-word passage that's in common, and v'Hashem and v'Hashemu in the two passages. So don't use the other phrases which aren't as long, significant, right? Clearly, echoing one the other. Take the longer phrase. Don't use the longer phrase, basically. Okay, it's a little strange because another. I mean, how could you have resolved this otherwise? You like the question from Vishav Uva, those are completely different words, but you still want to, if you that's in the abstract. There's no other competing Xera Shava to make from those. But here it's like, yeah, take the closer. Like I think it was quite compelling to say take the one that's closer, right? V'Hashem and V'Hashemu is closer than V'Hashem and Yasham. I think that's not knocked out of the park by the existence of the Shavava. But anyway, this other methodology also has some appeal that since you have this long passage that's the same, then that indicates that Vashem and V'Hashemu is the ones that should be comparable to Xer Shava.
Well, what's the long passage here? He talks
No,
about
the long passage is Asher Lo Achas Mikol Mitzvos Hashem Asher Lo Te'asena. 5 words that appear in both.
But then Gemara says, "V'al yochich shemiat kol."
Yeah, so don't take the shorter passages in common. Don't take that as an indication. Your real indication is the longest passage that appears in 2 places. That's where you make the Gzera Shava of Hashem and V'Hashemu. Okay.
So when it says kol, that's referring to the shorter passages, right?
Yeah. Right.
V'al yochich shemiat kol.
Right.
By time.
Yeah.
Mikdash.
Exactly. Okay.
And so what? Well, what is the purpose of in this case, the Gezerah Shava? What are we trying to link together? I mean, it seems very convoluted here.
Yes. Somewhat.
And I'm getting lost with this thread. I'm getting lost in the main point. And what are we trying to link together?
We're trying to link together. Good question. I have to think back for a second.
Yeah.
We're going back to what the Mishnah stated, trying to support what the Mishnah stated, which is that there's a commonality between all these different situations, the Mikdash and the Nida. The Mikdash is different than the non-Mikdash activities, non-Mikdash prohibitions. Excuse me. Yeah, that these rules apply both to the carbon tzibur, the parallel rishot tzibur, and or the communal offerings and the asham taloi. That's the key point we're trying to get at. That the Mishnah said that they are subject to the same rules, right? Just as the communal chatas only applies to Zedona Karis Vashigas Achatos. Same rules apply to Asham Tolo. It only applies to Averos for which fall in that category, and we get it through this Gzera Shava.
We're not sure which Gezerah Sheva though. That's what it seems to be. We're trying to
Well,
find
we proposed alternative Gzera
right.
Shavas that would have would have said that no, you can't use that for Xer Shabbat. We're using it for something else, or we're comparing it to a different place, and we ended up by saying no. This is how we know that these are the two that we're going to compare. I think we will actually stop here for today and let David pick up at the new Mishnah. It's already 8:30, so thank you, and we will continue picking up here tomorrow.
I have one question. It's not well, I don't think it's specific to this tomorrow, but somewhere is it true that a korban chata does not go on the mizbeach? Is that correct?
Um,
I was trying to. I heard that a few days ago, and I said, "What?" And I started looking. I was looking that up, and it seemed that you do bring, but they sprinkle the blood of the chatat on the mizbeach and so forth. But is that? Do we bring the chatat on the mizbeach?
I'm gonna say I think yes, but
I think so too.
yeah. So where are you getting the question from?
It was because in one of the shirim a few days ago, I think the Daf Yomi, someone, no, we don't. Someone said, I don't remember who it's, that we don't, that the korban chata does not go on the mizbeach.
Well, we'll get to Kachim in a little while, and we'll find out. I don't remember that, but that doesn't mean anything.
I looked it up in a few places, and the sources were, it's yeah, you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, but and then you burn the evarim and so forth. But I I I didn't
Yeah.
see it. I mean, I'm not sure where else. Where else to look right now, but I just wasn't sure from the sources that I researched after hearing that statement during one of the shiurim.
Okay. Well, I'm curious. Now, take a look, and I'll let you know what I find.
All right.
The details of a chatas when it's done with it. Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Okay.